Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. The Department of English at the University of Winnipeg acknowledges that we live and work on the territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, Métis, and Oji-Cree nations. The University of Winnipeg sits on Treaty 1 territory, the ancestral and traditional homeland of Anishinaabe peoples. Treaty 1, signed in 1871, took this territory from 7 local Anishinaabe First Nations in order to make the land available for settler ownership and use. Welcome, everybody, to the annual Carol Shields Writer-in-Residence Distinguished Lecture, one of my favorite events of the year. Probably my favorite event, the favorite event. I'm Catherine Hunter, and on behalf of the English department, I'm here to introduce our speaker this evening, the accomplished writer, Suvankam Tamavongsa. As regular audience members for this lecture series know, each and every writer in residence has placed their own creative and original mark on the event, frequently redefining the word lecture in wonderful ways. Suvankam Tamavongsa has titled her talk with a question. What is a writer? An intriguing question that isn't explored often enough, and I look forward to hearing her perspective on this topic. First, though, I'm going to introduce our host for the lecture, my colleague, Dr. Sandy Poole, who will engage our speaker in conversation and will manage the Q&A, the question and answer, after the talk. I'm very excited to introduce Sandy to you. She's the newest member of our English department and has been teaching here since September. She had to move to Winnipeg in the midst of this pandemic, so it's been hard for us to properly show her the town and introduce her to people. Sandy Poole is a Canadian writer and professor of creative writing. This term, she's teaching an intro to English course and a creative writing seminar in hybrid poetics, about which I hear great things. She has previously taught in universities in Canada, the UK, and the USA. Sandy's first poetry collection, Exploding into Night, was nominated for the Governor General's Award for Poetry. Her second collection, Undark, an oratorio, was nominated for Ontario's Trillium Book Award for Poetry, an Alberta Book Award, and a Toronto Arts Award. She is currently writing nonfiction. Her collection of essays in progress, entitled I Love Lucy, is represented by Evitas Creative Management, and she's been awarded fellowships at Yaddo, the Burton House, and the Dora Maar House in France to work on it. A selection from this book has recently been published by The Walrus. It's a gorgeous essay on grief called Death in the Age of Facebook, and I'm going to post a link to that essay in the chat for this event so that people can follow it up later. We're very fortunate to have Sandy as a colleague here, and I know that the community will welcome her warmly in person as soon as it's safe to do so. And now to introduce our distinguished speaker, the 2021 University of Winnipeg Carol Shields Writer-in-Residence, Suvankam Tamavongsa. Her fiction has appeared in Harper's, Granta, The Atlantic, the Paris Review, Plowshares, Best American Non-Required Reading, the Journey Prize Stories, and the O. Henry Prize Stories, all extremely prestigious publications. Her debut book of fiction, How to Pronounce Knife, is the winner of the 2020 Scotia Giller Prize, a New York Times Editor's Choice, and one of Time's must-read books of 2020. The title story was a finalist for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. She is also the author of 4 acclaimed poetry books, Light, which was the winner of the Trillium Book Award for Poetry, and Found, and Small Arguments, winner of the Relit Award, and most recently, Cluster. Born in the Lao refugee camp in Nong Khai, Thailand, she was raised and educated in Toronto where she's at work on her first novel. It's very exciting news to hear. Suvankam, thank you for your wonderful poems, which open up language in all kinds of new ways, and for your beautiful stories, which open up their characters' lives with reverence, grace, and humor. The University of Winnipeg Bookstore has Suvankam's poetry collection cluster and her Giller Prize-winning book of stories, How to Pronounce Knife, and people may purchase them online at the bookstore website. Now, because books are sold according to courses on the website, the bookstore manager has made up a course called Event Carol Shields 2021. And I'm going to post the link to that page in the chat so that people who want to pursue those books may do so. And of course, if the link doesn't work, just email the University of Winnipeg bookstore and they will set you right. But it should work. I tried it today. Okay, and I'm just going to turn this event over. Sandy's going to make a brief announcement, and then we'll have the lecture.
Thank you so much for the warm introductions. I appreciate it. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. We're really happy to have your company for this amazing event. I've been saying it over and over, and I will say it again. This is my favorite book of short stories of the year. I've been telling everybody, to buy this book. So if you haven't already, I'm sure many of you have, pick up a copy of this spectacular book of short stories. And I just wanted to just pop my head in before the lecture starts to just plug the fundraiser one more time. I'm sure some of you are tired of hearing me say this, but we have an amazing fundraiser that goes along with the Writer in Residence program and helps to support the program. And this year it's particularly exciting because we have a brand new initiative, which is that we've come across in the archives an unpublished Carol Shields short story, which is an amazing story. I've had the chance to read it. It's called Protein Dust. And so what we've decided to do is to bind that story into a book. And the first 100 people to donate will receive a copy of this book. So you need to make a donation of only $100 or more in order to potentially get a copy. So I believe, as far as we know, there are still a few copies left of Protein Dust. So I do encourage you, if you have the funds, to contribute, because it's exactly this kind of thing that makes this kind of event possible. So thank you very, very much. And so without further ado, I will pass it over to Suvankam, but I just wanted to say that if you stick around after Sue's lecture, we are going to have a kind of fun mediated discussion about our biggest failures, writing advice, what's good, what's bad. So that will follow the lecture. The lecture will be approximately 20 to 30 minutes. So thank you so much, and take it away, Sue.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the introduction, Catherine, and thank you so much for joining me tonight here. Now, I don't want you to just look at my face all night, so I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation to go for my lecture. I'm going to share my screen, and the voice you hear is mine. It's timed to be read live. What is a writer? A writer writes. A writer is not your mother. A writer is not your friend. A writer is not your drinking buddy, not your pal. A writer is not your therapist. A writer is not here for your romantic interests. A writer writes. A writer is not everything to you. And they shouldn't be. Don't reach out. I'm not that friendly. I can't solve your problems. I can't even solve mine. I don't want to save the world. There are people who do this and want to and can, are in the position to do so. I don't want to be a hero. I'm not heroic or even good. I will fail you and disappoint you. I have my mess, and I'm allowed to have it. I am not who you imagine me to be. If we know anything about writers and the writing life, writers are not always the best people. I certainly wouldn't look to them to be anything for me. It's okay for a writer to just want to work, to want to do nothing but the work. A writer doesn't have to have an MFA or a PhD, live in New York, have friends, a Twitter account, win prizes, or have a book. You can start at any age. Have a family that does things like this. Who won't buy you new shoes, even though they have holes, or air conditioning, in the words of my parents. There can't ever be only one. There's a photograph of me in a school library. I have barrettes in my hair. My favorite books are the Amelia Bedelia ones. She got things wrong all the time and made me laugh. It's important to get things wrong. You know a thing more this way. You know what it looks like when you get it right. You know what it looks like when you get it wrong too. To always get it right is to know one thing that isn't enough. This picture of me in front of these bookshelves has been in my mind for a long time. Joan Didion wrote that we need to be on nodding terms with who we once were. Otherwise, who we were will feel ignored and demand to know why we haven't been in touch. This picture is the loudest person in my life. My parents didn't stay up with me, helping me with homework. They did this. On a school night. There was no one to tell me to do my homework, to get it right. Maybe there didn't have to be. There is this girl in my head, looking at me just like this. When I went to school, no one told me to be or to become something. The fact that I got to be there was good enough. I knew exactly what I wanted to be: a writer. I just didn't know how that happens. A writer doesn't have to be published. A writer writes. A writer can't get you published. Your writing gets you published. There's a difference between having a book and seeing yourself in print. They are not the same. A writer isn't famous. Their writing is. A writer sometimes doesn't write. Let me tell you, if I may, there's no such thing as writer's block. You aren't writing because it might be that you're tired. You're allowed to be tired. You aren't writing because you're grieving. You're allowed to feel sad. You're allowed to feel. You aren't writing because you're reading, being with friends. Maybe you aren't writing because you don't know how. You're allowed not to know how and to sit with that. A writer thinks of the sentence. A sentence is a lot of things. It has nuts and bolts. Learn to tighten them or turn them loose. A sentence always has a feeling. So many feelings. I like the breathless ones, the ones I can't hear, the ones who don't explain. A sentence can take years to form and say nothing. A sentence can arrive one at a time, all at once, or not at all. Sentences can die, and you can bring them back over and over again. A writer doesn't have to write. They can work 15 years in the research department. Count bags and bags of cash. 5 levels below the basement. And think of the light they can't see. It's okay not to be a writer. The world will be just fine. If writing is difficult, you don't have to write. Prepare taxes, pave roads. I have an idea for a book. Doesn't make you a writer. Well, I can floss. That doesn't make me a dentist, huh? I've been writing for more than 2 decades. I know you haven't heard of me. But is that my fault? A writer can be someone you've never heard of, someone you haven't heard from. I was once asked, where do you find the courage to write? The truth is, if I'm honest, it doesn't take courage. I'm scared too. And I write. But that no one fosters a writer's career. Be suspicious of anyone who says so. A writer fosters their own writing by showing up, writing through blank and noise. Prizes do not make books. Writers make books. I'm always asked, what advice do you have? Stop. Asking for advice. You already know what makes you fantastic. And if you don't, figure it out. And who is to say that with 5 books, I'm not the one who needs advice? What's it like to feel joy at seeing yourself in print on a bookshelf for the first time? Or hold the hope that someday you will? I can't teach a writer to love what they've made, to be kind to their art. I can teach a writer to be a reader. But don't let me tell you what is a writer. What is a writer? A writer writes. I tell my parents I'm a writer. They don't know what that is exactly, but they know I make one of those things on the shelf behind me. What is a writer? A writer can have a name like mine, can look like me, What is a writer? You know the answer already, but let me repeat. A writer is not your mother. A writer is not your friend. A writer writes. Don't reach out. I'm not that friendly. So that is the presentation. I'd really love to hear from Sandy about bad advice.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much. The sad thing about these digital events is that you can't hear people laughing. I'm sure people were laughing, so let me do it. Thank you so much. Yes, okay, so what were we going to talk about? We were going to talk about bad advice, right?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, what's the worst piece of writing advice that you think you've ever heard? I'm trying to think of one.
Wow. I can't think of one because it's so bad. I haven't retained it. Do you know what I mean? I can't retain bad advice. Well, maybe the idea that you can make a living out of it, or the idea that there are readers waiting. I don't like to hold up that dream for writers, or especially when they're beginning. Of course, you know, when you're established, yes, so there are readers waiting. And yes, you can make a living, but I just mean like before you become a writer, like there's a difference between being a writer and writing. And for me, I would just encourage that a writer writes.
Yeah, I was just thinking about one MFA class that I took where I had put a story in that had dreams, newspaper articles, and letters, because I've been reading too much Alice Munro. And I remember somebody coming in and saying, like, that's my number one rule about writing is no one should write anything with dreams, newspaper articles, or letters, which I feel like it was directed at me personally.
Do you use those things?
Well, and I guess I haven't lately, but it really put me off putting those things in my work. But I did, I had a story with all three. So for me, it was like pretty embarrassing. It was
I don't know. I think a good writer knows what to do with stuff like that. Like I just had a discussion with a student in my creative writing class who said that they read a story that began with the love of the line, the love of my life. But yet that was, he said that it starts in Catch-22. That's what the line that starts it. But I don't remember that line, probably because, you know, the writer knew what to do with it. I think a good writer can do anything, like with things that we avoid, like a cliche.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the essence of bad advice, right? It's hard to give good advice because in the right writer's hands, they can do almost anything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. Like, I came up with a list of bad things that even things I've said myself in the last week, I will admit.
Write what you know.
And I thought, yes, okay, that's one of them. Respond. You can respond. Write what you know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think you should be curious about, you know, what you don't know. What you don't know informs what you know. Like the lecturer said, that the things that you don't know are more more valuable than what you know, because when you know something, that's all you know. But when you don't know something, you know what you don't know and also what you know. So it's more complete and more giving and generous in that way.
Yeah, and it's funny, it's like this idea of like, I love this. We talked about a little bit about this last time, but like how important it is to be able to make a mistake, right? So that you can know what a mistake looks like and, know how to manipulate it in some way that's productive for you. But it's like, and I find myself doing that with students a lot, where it's like, pointing out like these moments that are, a problem or a mistake. But really, I try to now say, actually, what else can you do? It's actually not what else can you do with this? Like, well, how can you make this work for you?
In class, we talk a lot about what works, what we like, what a good piece of writing is. But today I asked my students to write a bad sentence. And it was really lovely because we got to laugh at ourselves and each other and not take it all so seriously. And I think when you can recognize when a sentence is bad or when a piece of writing is bad, you learn to be a better editor of your own work.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. What about don't use cliches?
Sometimes cliches are comforting. It means, I think when you use a cliche, it means that you know the language well enough, you've read widely enough that you can recognize what a cliche is. I think a bad writer thinks, clouds or sky or eyes as blue as the sky, that is an original and refreshing description.
Yes, you have to know what a cliche is before you can.
Yeah.
The thing that I caught from your lecture is like, you have to read widely. Like that might be something we could agree on as something that a writer needs to do.
Yeah.
How else would you know? I mean, and some of these expressions too, like I used to teach ESL and I remember one student saying to the other something like, let's go and shoot the shit. And the other student being like, just standing there staring for a really long time. Like some of these expressions are very strange, right? Like,
right. And that line could be thought of as a cliche to shoot the, shit. But when you're new to the language, you hold on to those things because a cliche tells the people around you that you belong, that you know the language. And a cliche is a marker of belonging.
Yeah, so it's useful.
Definitely.
Okay, what about people can write in the comments too, if you can think of good ones. I was thinking of what do you think about write every day?
No.
That's what I think.
Maybe you have a cold, maybe you have the flu, maybe you need to do the laundry or fold your clothes, maybe you have to get the mail, maybe you have to drive somewhere. Writing every day is just too much. You don't have to write every day.
I agree. Yeah. Catherine Hunter says, bad advice I once got. Just write 1 page a day. And at the end of the year, you'll have a 365 page book. Yes, that's horrible. It's just so unrealistic. And I think it ties into like, I love in your lecture, it was almost like you were talking about the myth of the creative writer. And I think a lot of people really want desperately to buy into the myth of the writer, maybe as a slogger or someone who writes a page a day, blah, blah, blah. But I think that people really want to believe that. I'm just thinking of students that were very angry when they read Sheila Heti's How Should a Person Be? And they said, well, the character is not very nice. Like they wanted the character of the writer to be nice. And it's like, there's such pressure. And so I love the line, I'm not that friendly. Can you talk a little bit more about like, what does that mean to you?
What that means that if I'm tired, I can be tired. I don't have to put on a show or be on. When you write a book, people think that they've had an experience with you. And then when you meet them, they realize that the experience, that you actually haven't had that experience with them. And it's very upsetting. And you're not holding up, you have no idea about this experience that they've had. And you have to be careful about that distance and absence that they encounter when they meet you. It can be very disappointing when, people have read your work and feel so attached to the writing and form ideas and feelings about what you've made and who you are as a person. I'm allowed to not want to, I was asked, can we be writing friends? And I laughed because I thought, how about like just trying to be my friend first?
What's a writing friend? Oh, is it
Right, exactly.
I don't know. I don't even know what that is. Yeah. Okay. What about writing is supposed to be difficult? I hear that a lot.
No, maybe you know what you're doing, so it's easy. I mean, I understand. I do see that, yeah, I do see that sometimes we feel when things are difficult that they're so hard won. And so therefore the thing that we've made must have some value. But sometimes we take ease for granted. We just, over the years, we learn how to do things to describe better, to be more precise. And if that comes easy, who, who is anyone to take away that ease from us?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of the person and the timing and all sorts of things. It's always something that I'm trying to explain to students, but it's really hard to express, right? This idea about, it doesn't have to be difficult. It might be difficult. You might be the kind of person that does have to slog every single day, 365 days a year, or you might not. You might write it all in one afternoon, which is also wonderful, right?
Everybody, I think, has their own habits and their working methods. And just because you don't work the same way, it doesn't mean you're any less or that your skill is any less.
It's true. Hi, Mina Wallen. Hi, Mina. Mina says, what about the so-called flow of writing myth? Yeah, very interesting.
Flow of writing. No, sometimes you have to stop and then like it takes 2 years to finish that sentence. I had in my short story Manny Petty, I had to describe a cheap shoe. I couldn't just say cheap shoe. So I spent 4 months looking for what details that what makes a cheap shoe. And then I discovered that a shoe is cheap when you wear it and then there are creases in the toe. An expensive shoe just doesn't form a crease. And, I didn't get that detail right away. And even though the text flows, the truth is in real life, it took me 4 months just to get that one sentence.
And sometimes it does, right? Sometimes it just takes the time that it takes. Or
yeah,
I often tell students to put stuff away, stop looking at it, just put it in a drawer and go do something else, which is, I mean, it's kind of lofty if they have to hand it in for an assignment, but just in terms of great writing, just put it away, bring it back out when you feel like you have the energy to devote to it, I think is important.
Yeah.
Right? Life happens to people.
And they should allow it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Janina Logan says, I attended a lecture given by Margaret Atwood and loved her answer to this question. What advice would you give my daughter to become a writer? Margaret replied with her voice drooping with disdain. I don't know your daughter. How could I give her any advice?
Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. I also love
it's also a form of don't reach out. I'm not that friendly.
Exactly. She's also my favorite Margaret Atwood like tidbit was that she went to a party and there was an astronaut there and he went up and he was very excited and he said, I'm so excited because I've just retired And I'm going to now write a book. So I'm really glad you're here. And I turned to him and said, well, that's really great, because I was just thinking that in my retirement, I'd really like to be an astronaut. So well.
People think, yeah, in the lecture, I said, people tell me all the time, I have an idea for a book. And then, you know, like, what if I talk that way? Well, I know how to floss. Does that make me a dentist now? Can I be a dentist now?
Exactly. Yeah, and I wanted to just, so we like advice, and then I think we were also going to talk about failure and writing, which is something that like we don't often talk about, or sometimes it's hard to talk about failure and writing. And I'm trying, I'm sure you are too, in your classes to actually like address this, like not only this notion of like you might not make money, these like crazy notions that they're going to make lots of money, but also just like, you know, that writers fail. And
yes, and that 80% of writing is rejection, waiting a year or two to hear back from an editor before it gets published. It's not instant, and you have to hold on in all that time. Every day you have to encounter what you made, and think about how it feels that day from where you've sent it out to.
Yeah, and one of my students wanted me to ask you sort of, I guess, just if you could talk a little bit about like, what is it for you that allows you to keep going? You know, like when things are so hard, and I think like she was talking about COVID, but you know, just in general, like, so what's the thing that keeps you going, for example?
My imagination, you know, the world is a lot bigger than how narrow it's become. My ability to look for joy in the most ordinary things, like ice cream or pizza, or thinking of a baseball game or warm weather. I appreciate seeing the sun. I mean, when I look out the window, we're in lockdown here. When I look out the window and I see the bare streets in what would be a crowded area, I feel like that's a sign that we actually care about each other, and that we are at home. We're not in the streets, maskless. So that bareness and that blankness to me says that we care about each other. That's what, and we're strangers, and you know, we have no reason, no real personal reason to care, but we do. And sometimes a stranger cares for you in really profound ways, and you may never meet them. And I think of that when I look out the window and see nobody.
It's lovely. That's lovely. That's a lovely answer. And I think very helpful for students who are just struggling to keep going right now. And I can't even imagine what it's like to be a creative writing student right now and having, you know, assignments due all over the place and just trying to keep going, I think is very, very hard. So that's great advice. Yeah, so failure. Okay, we were going to talk a little bit about failure. I think we were going to, now I'm worried. I think we're going to ask each other what our biggest writerly failures are.
I don't really see them as failures, you know. I think when I look back, I'm actually really proud of the books that I made, you know, like 20 years ago. When I look at the writing, I do see that I failed, that I'm not there yet, but I see how I finish a line, or how I start one, or how I try with what I have. And for me, seeing myself try with what I have, that can't really be a failure. I think it would be a failure if I just stopped. And I guess that also leads us back to how do you not I mean, when you encounter that point when you want to stop, how do you keep going? Really, yeah,
I was just thinking, I really love what Ira Glass talks about storytelling, and he talks about how, you know, when you're first starting, like for example, if you first start writing, that you, you know, you're reading lots and you're taking lots in, right? So that it's like, you know, I think you see like a gap. It's like it's not a bad, it's not a failure, it's a gap, and it's a gap between what you're doing and
right.
what, you know, the people that you're reading are doing. But you know, and maybe you can't quite bridge that gap, but the thing that got you into the game, your taste, right? Your taste is still killer. So
Right.
it's like you just need to know that the only way to get through that is to just keep going, right? And if you can just keep going, eventually that gap will get smaller and smaller and smaller. So
Mm.
I don't know, maybe it's not failure, maybe it's just like the learning curve.
Time, maybe it isn't failure, it's just time that that moves you forward.
Yeah. And that's, I guess that's also like, because I mean, we were also sort of talking about like, um, what's the, what can we say in terms of the learning curve to beginning creative writing students? And I'd love to hear if other folks have comments about that. Like, um, what do you say to inspire your students? Like, you know, in terms of just keeping going, and just to treat it not like a failure, which I know like I found very, very difficult when I was younger, to look at it as a learning experience. Maybe it's just about reframing your thinking then.
Definitely. And also to go back to the reading, the books that they love. They formed their love to to they formed their love out of that, and that love brought them to the page. And if you can remember what brought you to the page, um, that's what you should hold on to. Even people, you know, who publish 10 or so books, they don't remember what brought them to the page. And I think that is a form of failure. Just because you have like 10 books, it doesn't mean it's a success if you can't enjoy or remember the joy that brought you to the page.
Yes, that's what we were going to talk about. This feeling of like seeing yourself in print and not feeling joy. Can you, before I was going to say something, but I want to hear what, so what have you been going through in terms of like you said, you know, it's maybe your relationship has changed a bit to seeing yourself in print. I wanted to talk about that. That's a hard thing.
Yeah, it used to be that when I saw something that I wrote in print, I'd be so thrilled and I could live with that joy for like a year, thinking what it looks like on print, my name in print. But now I can't, I mean, it's just there on the page to me. It doesn't, I don't feel the joy that I felt like 20 years ago to see it in print. And I think that's a real loss and a failure on my part. And I have to work to get that back.
Mm. Yeah, and I think I feel similarly in that like now I'm becoming slower too. That's the other thing that seems to be happening. And then when it does get printed, I just see all the mistakes. I mean, there's lots of writers in this group, participants. I'm sure some of them have tips for how to like see your work fresh and anew. But for me, it's like I struggle not to see like the aesthetic errors now,
Mm.
in a way where before I just was really, really happy to see it
Mm.
printed. And I'm not sure how to get that back either. I think that's really a tough.
Yeah.
I don't think it's your failure though. I think it's like maybe we're desensitized or something, but.
Wow. I think, do you think being around students who get excited about things like that, you're reminded that there is such thing as that joy and that you should get, you know, like just witnessing it, does that maybe bring it a little bit back?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
have a student today actually who wrote a hybrid piece, and you know, if you can suggest a piece of reading, which I always try to do, like something that they might learn from, and they come back to you and say, I actually learned from this, and here's how I've improved my piece, you know, I think that's amazing. It doesn't always happen, you know, like sometimes you give somebody the wrong piece of writing and then they don't like it, or they, you know, I've even had students come back and say, who do you think I am by giving me this book? Like, what kind of writer did you think I was going to be? I don't like this book, you know? So I always say to them, you can learn as much from a book that you don't like also as a
Yeah,
like.
I agree. I think when you have a book that you don't like, figure out why that is. What are they doing that makes you feel that way? And then, you know, maybe you're encountering something that you're wrong about. And if you pay attention to it, you'll become a better writer.
I also wanted to ask you, tell me about, like, is that it seems like you sort of have always known that you wanted to be a writer. Can you remember the first moment that you absolutely knew in your whole being that you were going to be a writer?
Well, we had this like special unit in our class in grade 5, and we wrote stories, and then it was printed and bound. And I wrote something called Penny, and it was about a girl who was kicked out of her home and lived on the streets. And well, you know, I wasn't a writer then. And I I used the first names of the principal and the teachers that I knew. I guess I was being lazy or something. And my teachers thought this was real because it used their real names, and they sent social workers to my mom and dad to make sure that what I wrote was not real. And even though I should have been afraid of what I wrote, I remember thinking, oh, wow, I could write something and people will believe like what I made. And I just like, I made something out of nothing. And I just thought that was so amazing. I've never, I mean, I really, I mean, it was a moment where I was like, I want to do this, whatever this thing is. Yeah.
How amazing. How powerful did you feel? I mean, that's an incredible story. If that's not going to turn you into a writer, I don't know what is.
I mean, even today, you know, I will get reporters asking me about picking worms, and I have to say, I don't know anything about picking worms. I just made a story up called Picking Worms. I know that it feels real, but it is not. I wrote about a mother leaving her child, and someone had written, oh, I hope you find your mother. But I know where my mother is. She's alive. Yeah. But I find that fascinating, to make something that isn't real and to see the belief that it is real. Or it feels almost like magic, in that you want to know how it's made and how it's built. And it has so much to do with faith and belief and thought. And it's just really lovely to see it all come together when you're making a book.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I mean, I guess there's two other, oh yeah. So Janina Logan says, in our book club, the best discussions are always with the books we don't like. It's so true, because they're really productive conversations.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. There's one more. So Barbara Schott, I was born in 1960 to German immigrant parents. It was still very post-World War II, and Germans were problematic in this country. Though I'm born here, I didn't speak any English until I went to kindergarten, and was raised by immigrant grandparents who never learned English. This is a long way of saying that when I read your collection, it really spoke to me about the immigrant experience, learning the language, the cultural misunderstandings, So much of what you described here was also my experience. So I would be interested to hear if you feel these immigrant experiences are specific or perhaps more similar. I won't use the word generic. I was so glad that you were able to write your experience. The sad thing for me growing up was that the German experience was a difficult one that you couldn't talk about and that you suppressed because it was all about shame and guilt. Your story was not considered legitimate. So sort of a question/comment, maybe just talk about the immigrant experience in your work.
Well, I know that when we talk about my collection, we often talk about immigrants and refugees, but and sadness, but I'm also up to much more than that. I care about taking what you know and leaning on that and changing and twisting and making daring narrative moves. You know, we all know the line, "Go back home." But in my story, Randy Travis, I render that line meaningless and hilarious. One thing I hate ever about being a writer is making people feel pity. My stories, I never feel sorry for my characters or the people in them. They're all brave and strong and hilarious, and ungrateful. You know, as refugees or immigrants, we're not allowed to be seen to feel ungrateful. And I wanted these stories to open up those feelings and make it possible to acknowledge and to address them. I mean, I'm really glad that so many people have felt a kinship with those stories. I've visited book clubs, and many people have said that it felt like I was standing right there with them in their childhood. And I wasn't there, you know, I made it up. And I think that is the power of writing, that I made you feel that what I made is yours and that it's real. That's something, you know, I work really hard on when I talk about my father or my mother. That doesn't mean anything. I have to make you feel like it's your mother, it's your father, that who you love and who you come from are at stake.
Yeah, and I guess there's like this feeling of also, you know, it's nice if people connect to your work. I mean, that's a nice thing, but it doesn't, it's not like the writer's responsibility, right? It's more of like a, but I feel, okay, this is a tenuous question, but I feel like often it's also female and female identified writers that they often struggle with like readers wanting them to be the protagonists in the book. And that's not, you know, it just doesn't happen. And also I've definitely, because I've written 2 books about social justice issues that aren't about me, and men on panels will ask, well, where are you in these books? I don't see you anywhere. Where are you? And they desperately wanted it to be autobiographical, and it just wasn't. But that doesn't mean I'm not in the book. I mean, I think what you're saying here is like you're working on craft too, right? Like you're in the craft, like you're fully embedded in the process.
I'm also comfortable in the dark. I mean, you know, I know what it's like to do a job that nobody notices I'm great at. I know what it's like to feel like love isn't everything and it's not enough. I know what it's like to be alone with the language. And that's what I put in my stories and make you feel that you know them too. Like those feelings are real. But the story that I made is crafted and it's fiction. Another way to get around it, of course, is that in the audiobook, the narrator is a man. And so when I was involved in the casting of that, and I really enjoyed just hearing a voice that wasn't mine, because it really showed that these stories are stories. And when people heard them, they didn't attach me to those stories. And it was, in a way, a bit of a relief.
It sounds liberating. So you said
Yeah,
she had a hand in choosing like the male voice for the
yeah,
audiobook, is that right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be it's super interesting to think about. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Mina Wallen asks, aren't we supposed to feel bad for the husband who was cheated on in his own home?
No, we're supposed to feel bad that he got a parking ticket.
Exactly, of course, of course.
You know, like I know that story, actually that story almost didn't make it into the collection because it is so cruel. And one of its cruelties is that the narrator is no friend. The narrator, that voice of the narrator, doesn't even refer to him by his own name. The narrator refers to him by his job, often calls him the school bus driver. The thing that, you know, just is so brutal in that story is actually not the cheating, because it's what it is really a financial transaction. And the husband profits off of it. The thing that breaks your heart is that every morning he goes into his school bus and there's a bright yellow parking ticket on top of everything that's going on in his life. He's lost his name. I wouldn't say he's lost his love, but the love he has is in danger. But the thing that really breaks your heart is this very incredible, ordinary, stupid thing, a parking ticket.
Yeah, Bruno asks, I often hear from writers of color their frustration that for some reasons people assume that their writing is always autobiographical, even in fiction. This conversation seems to reflect that. Yeah, do you feel that? Is that something that you feel?
Not a frustration, because I undo that right away whenever anybody wants to know my real life. I tell them that's not an important question. What you mean to say is that you're complimenting my style. And I also often tell them that when we see a beautiful sunset, we don't need to know who put it there. We just enjoy it.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. But I mean, like, is that a question that you get often? Like, is
Yeah.
the autobiographical question about your work?
Yeah. But, you know, on the one hand, I'm glad, you know, to be talking to somebody actually who has read the book. And then on the other, you know, I just think every question is annoying. So I just treat it in the same way. An autobiographical question. I think readers or those who ask it mean well, but I try to undo that by saying it's actually intrusive, and I actually hope more writers will join me in that, in saying it often, in telling those who ask that question. I think what you mean is you're complimenting my style.
I think that's a great line. It's a perfect thing to say. Yeah. So do you feel, like I've often heard some writers like answering questions, and I've heard some writers often say like, I wish people would just read the book, and I wish I didn't have to sort of answer questions about my own work. Like, I wish they could just go back to the text. Is that something, does that resonate with you at all?
Well, I'm moody, so it really depends on
You're not that friendly.
what I'm feeling that day. Sometimes I'm eager to talk to people because it's like I haven't talked to anybody in like 2 weeks or something, so I don't mind the question. Other times it is intrusive, and it's not fair.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I find it hard when you're like, I'm definitely a people pleaser, but I find it very difficult to just shut people down completely. And I'm trying to learn to just say what I want to say when someone asks a question. Oh, Kathy Ald says, do you have an impression of Winnipeg as a place? Did you expect to be in Winnipeg as a writer in residence? Well, that definitely not. It certainly was going to be virtual the whole time. But do you have an impression of Winnipeg as a place? That's an interesting question.
I do, and that it's cold, I imagine.
It is, and I'm wearing this color because I'm trying to banish winter from this place, and it is not working. So, I mean, have you ever been to Winnipeg?
Have for a writers' festival.
Oh, okay. Which one? Do you remember?
Thin Air.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've never been to Winnipeg. When I moved here from Britain, I just sort of showed up, and I still don't really know where I am because I don't leave the house. I could be anywhere. I have no idea what Winnipeg is like. I'm sure it's great. And I'm excited to learn more about it, but hopefully we'll be able to bring you back in some capacity so that you can
Definitely
see Winnipeg. Yeah. Okay, unless anybody else has questions. Oh, Bonnie says, you're missing so much by not being here. That's partially true. I wouldn't know because I'm not leaving my house, but I've heard amazing things about Winnipeg, and the people here are certainly wonderful. And I would like to join those people, those participants, in just saying thank you so much for your service to all of our students. And just taking the time to really work with people's writing is you know, a testament to your teaching and your writing. And I know that a lot of students have really benefited from your keen, intelligent eye on their work, and they're very lucky. So thank you.
No, thank you for inviting me here. You know, one of the valuable things about being a writer in residence is I don't have to explain that what I do is in English. Because, you know, obviously, or that you know, that I have a book. Because the university does that, takes care of those kinds of questions that I don't have to handle. So I appreciate and I'm so thrilled to have been here.
Well, we feel very lucky to have you on behalf of the whole university, and especially the Faculty of Arts and the Department of English. Thank you very much. This has been an amazing event, and I really appreciate your time. And I'm sure that other people may have more questions for you that they haven't had answered, but they will certainly email them to me and I'll forward them along.
Okay.
Thank you so much to everybody. And the link to the recording, I believe, will be on the university website on the Writer in Residence page. So you can watch this recording again if you like to. And thank you so much to everybody for joining us, and we will see you again. Yes, it will be posted in the next few days. Have a nice evening, everybody. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.